So welcome everyone. I'm Jan Jeremias, one of your hosts today. I am an integrative health and wellness coach and author who works with people and pets to help them overcome health challenges and live healthier lives. And I'm very excited, as always, to be joined on stage with my co-host, collaborator, and dear friend, the amazing and very kind Mary Jane McQueen. So Mary Jane, maybe just tell everyone a little bit more about yourself.
Yes, well, good day, everyone. Yeah, I'm honored. Pardon me, I seem to have a hoarseness happening in my voice. I'm not sure why, but I'm just really honored to be here today with all of you and Jan, of course, who it really inspires me every day. Um, to just as her words for the year are shine brightly. I love that. I love that. So yes, she encourages me to shine brightly. And yeah, I have my own creative design studio, and I really love helping my fellow entrepreneurs to step into their light and share their gifts authentically. And it's really loving that and loving these audios that we're doing. So just welcome everyone and I guess we're on the road now. Are you there?
Yes, yes, I can. Yes, we are. We are on the road. Um, did you want to share our poem for today, Mary Jane?
Sure. I sorry, I was saying to Jam before we started, I'm so used to having dual monitors that it's like interesting when I'm just working off my laptop. So just bear with me. I don't have it memorized, so I need to read. Um, so it's called Still There. So sometimes I can't believe it, how this room is the same, yet feels so different. I look in the mirror and it's still the same face, yet I question the person who looks back at me. Then I hear the voice in the back of my head, swift, sweet, and young, and the whole world is in focus. I see the mature lines on my face, the cabinet on the far wall instead of beside the bed, the stack of books piled higher than years before. I feel dread for a moment, then relief, as the sweet voice continues, singing to me. The child is still there, even when I've grown old. And that is by Eves V. Everett. I really loved this poem, just the whole essence of it, the 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 revealing of the inner child still living on.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation on embracing the child within. We're so glad you're here, whether this is your first time joining us or you're a regular in this space. So today we're diving deep into a topic that's deeply personal and for many profoundly transformative, the concept of the inner child. So let's start with this question. Have you ever felt like there's a part of you, perhaps a younger version of yourself, that's been left unheard, unacknowledged, or even forgotten? Maybe there's a spark of joy, creativity, or passion that you've lost touch with over the years. Or perhaps there are wounds from your childhood that still linger in ways that are hard to fully understand or heal. We all carry within us the echoes of the child we once were, the dreams, the vulnerabilities, the desires to love and safety, and sometimes the pain. This inner child shapes how we experience life, how we show up in relationships, and even how we view ourselves. In our time together today, we're going to explore what it means to reconnect with this part of ourselves. We'll reflect on how to nurture and heal the inner child, how to rekindle the joy and creativity it holds, and most importantly, how to give that child a voice if it wants to be heard. This is an opportunity to listen, to honor, and to embrace that tender, vulnerable part of yourself that may have been silenced or overlooked. And as we moved through this conversation together, we encourage you to share openly if you feel comfortable. This is a safe and compassionate space for us to explore together. So let's begin by reflecting on these questions. What's one thing you remember loving as a child, a passion, a dream, or even just a simple joy that you might have forgotten or set aside? And what would it mean for you to reclaim that today?
It's a really good question, Jan. What would I can only are you okay with me sharing that what my little remembrances as a child?
Please.
Yeah, I used to spend, I know, Jen, you've heard me say the story before, but it's really about, I used to spend hours and hours as a little child just swinging on a swing that my dad built in our sort of front yard. And I used to spend so much time there, and it was so freeing. And it was just a really simple thing, but just that ease and grace of flying through the air as a little girl, and then seeing the world around me from a different perspective. It's just that was a simple joy that, when I want to reconnect to that simple joy, I just have to think of that little girl on the swing, spending hours doing that. So I that's a pleasant memory for me, of being a little child and just seeing the world around me.
Sorry, I'm also having technical difficulties this morning. Um, but I mean, I love the story, Mary Jane, just because I think that at some point or another, I think we were all that child, right? That you describe. We all had that experience of possibly going on a swing or doing something as a child where we absolutely felt free.
Hmm.
There were no rules. There were There's just like this idea of exploration and curiosity and awe about the what the world looked like, especially from that height, when you go up on a swing and you get like that kind of bird's eye view and then you come down. So you have that kind of very larger than life perspective, especially because as a child you're so small, you know, in stature. So, that feeling of freedom and exploration, which I think the newness, like, because when you're a kid, everything is exciting. It's kind of like when you go back as an adult to your house, if you ever have gone back to your childhood home, and then all of a sudden it looks so much smaller than it did then. It looked so much bigger than when you were a kid. And yeah, so I think to myself, I have often that experience with other things that I think of when I was a kid. For me, that whole idea of I had a pretty large forest behind my house as a kid, and that like going for hours and hours, just exploring the woods behind my house. And, there was nothing like it. There was this real idea of freedom. And that and the other thing was, well, maybe Seamus can relate to this growing up in Ireland, the rain. I remember rainstorms and the fact that, like, if it wasn't like, especially if we had a sun shower or a rain in the summer, then we would ride our bikes in the rain and intentionally go through puddles, so we'd get all, you know, we were dirty kids. What can I tell you? So, but that whole idea of, there were no rules necessarily. I mean, in that way your job was to get dirty and have fun. And at least that's what it was like in my house.
Yeah, that's true. It's like there was always that encouragement to spend time outdoors, enjoying nature. And yeah, it's just so many fond memories, of that time frame, because I moved from that area when I was 8 going on 9. So you could tell that my memories of the swinging was quite early. But yeah, it's true. It's like, I had my play clothes, and it didn't matter if they got dirty. It's as long as my good clothes didn't get dirty when we were going somewhere. That's all.
Oh, those good clothes getting dirty. I think I was pretty good. My brother, like my mother always, and I'll make you laugh. My brother always, like it was, he would like go down the front steps like 5 feet and he'd turn around and he'd be filthy. I mean, it was just like my mother used to always be like, what? It was just so funny. He always looked very, I don't know, the word is disheveled, like sort of like unkempt.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because we were all like from the same family. And my other brother and I would look very like, we would get dressed up.
Christine.
We would be pristine or whatever. And he was like, but he was who he was, but it was really funny. But yes, we did have, there were days where we just got to, where it didn't matter. And that was our job at the time, which kind of makes me sad because I don't know that kids get the opportunity to do that anymore. Um, Want to spend time outside, but also that idea of that kind of freedom,
Hmm.
I don't think is as easy today, safety wise and things like that. I think we felt very safe as kids. I mean, there was really no, there
That's
was,
very true.
there weren't threats like that, like now,
Hmm.
I think. And so I think that it's a little different nowadays than it was then, not to like be nostalgic or whatever, but
It's okay. We can be nostalgic. I see, Seamus, you have something to add.
yes,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. I mean, this whole idea of like environment and liberation and freedom, I think it's a common theme for most people in their childhood years to have experienced that level of freedom and nothing really to worry about and just go with the flow. And I'm actually looking at the window now of the place where I was born and have lived my whole life and where I was born and bred. And it kind of brings back the whole idea of have a wilderness. There's a quarry just around the house. I'm living in the countryside in rural Southern Ireland. And I'm looking out the window now at this limestone quarry that are in the middle of which, more or less in the middle of which are on the edge of, I suppose, it's more accurate to say, on the edge of which our house is built, a real old 200 maybe year old house in rural Ireland. And we have this quarry around us, and there's trees in the quarry, and it's a wilderness. And we often wonder now as adults, like all seven of us, we had seven, I was the youngest of seven, and we wonder how we survived. Basically, the quarry and the wilderness, because that's where we lived and spent our summer holidays. And friends of ours came here to play cowboys and Indians and roam and play and hide and seek and just be free, basically, like you're describing. That's what's coming back to me, and as you were describing your own experiences, was the liberation and freedom of those childhood years that we kind of we that can never be taken away from us, but somehow we lose as we get older and mature and think and about the pressures and challenges of life and all the rest of it. So I think it's nice to have this space where we go back and re-experience almost those years, but at the same time, realize that we have lived there. We probably part of natural human evolution is to grow up, mature, have our own families, work, career, all the rest of it. But I think it's back to creating space to remember and value those early life experiences, and they can never be taken away from us, I think, and they're a great source of still learning for us, I think, when we create that space to re-experience the liberation of that space, and really as a foundation to actually really reevaluate and question like the subsequent life decisions that we've made. And if we could take an element of that freedom into our modern thinking, that might be a great exercise maybe for many people, to maybe really integrate those early life experiences in a more deliberate way, I suppose, as Steve would often talk about, Jan, as well, in being 100% or in simply live simply and being 100% human. So that's kind of what's coming to me right now is the power of those experiences and the power of not letting them go, of not of not forgetting them, and the power of maybe finding a way to integrate them and into our modern busy lives, I suppose.
Um, so valuable, and I love that, Seamus. And I think that you used two words that really resonated with me, and it reminded me of the learning, because I think we learned so much when we were out there on our own. There were so many opportunities to learn. Where, first of all, usually you weren't alone, especially like as you described, Seamus, you were one of seven, and I know there were always, usually there were times alone, but there was quite often other kids, at least in my neighborhood, that lived, as I also grew up in a really rural environment. So, I mean, we had neighbors and they all had kids. So we did get that opportunity to sort of like to have relationships and have friendships and kind of learn how to navigate those relationships and things like that. And so there was so much value in doing that, not in a screen and not online, but just those interpersonal relationships. And then also this idea of adventure and kind of, having to fend for yourself and kind of learn without, adult necessarily being around. And then the other thing that you mentioned that I really love is how we can integrate them, and not just by memory necessarily. That's part of what Mary Jane and I do in our workshops as we get back to creativity, is to integrate those sort of like those things that maybe we did as a kid, or as a child, into our lives in some form, whether that be just getting outside in nature, if that's not, a normal everyday thing for you, just to go and explore. I mean, it's one of my favorite things to do. If I want to sort of uplift myself and feel like I need to get out, get that fresh air, get some space, um, experience that little bit of freedom in what can seem like a really heavy world at times. So yeah, so I love those two things. Well, much of what you shared, but those two things especially resonated with me.
It's so true. Or it's also that sense of, like I think Jim has alluded to as well, as is that sense of wonderment, of just that, the wonderment and that playful energy, and letting that sort of like fill your cup, you know, because sometimes we get so busy being busy. In order to refill our own cup, we need to take that time for ourselves, play a little, do something that really lights our heart up. And I think that's, as kids, that was something that at least I know, I did um, daily, and it was just really tapping back into that, and allowing that inner child, that little child that's still living in there, even though you might look in the mirror and see wrinkles, like the poem was saying, um, just to play.
And I think the gift of childhood in a lot of ways is that, like we've been talking about, is that, when you're a kid, it's your job to be, to me, it's your job to be a kid. And my mother, as Mary Jane knows, my mother was a kindergarten teacher for over 30 years. And she used to get these parents that would come in that were very driven, like themselves. So they were like, oh my God, my little Johnny or, Jane doesn't know how to read and they're 5 years old. Like, how are they going to be a doctor kind of mentality if they can't like read? And my mother used to always say, like, they're going to catch up. Like, don't worry. There's going to be a time where they're going to all eventually, it all kind of balances itself out. And, and she used to say, your job when you're a kid is to be a kid. Like that's your job. Your job is not to worry about whether what you're going to be, necessarily like the fact of what you can do and you can't do necessarily. It's like your job is to play, and how much you learn when you play is we're talking about. So I think of like those years of like those years, probably maybe early schooling, where school is a little bit less pressured depending on where you go to and a little bit less stressful. And you really do have that opportunity for that freedom, like you described to Mary Jane in the beginning, on the swing or whatever it was, or exploring quarries or forests. That was your job. And then all of a sudden it becomes so much more, the responsibilities come in, but also our ideas change of what like we feel is acceptable and unacceptable. So, we no longer think it's acceptable to, focus on those ventures of getting outside and exploring. And we tend to focus much more, I mean, at least in the US, on, you know, scholastic achievement and sports. And I'm not being critical of those, but we kind of leave that, I think, exploration of awe and wonderment behind in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? It's just like retapping into the thing, and that whole idea of reparenting your inner child, so that those things that may have happened when you're a child that still linger with you, that maybe that you don't necessarily want to address.
Mhm.
because they aren't necessarily the most positive of memories. Because that is some people's experience as well, that there are things that happen, traumas and things that happen as a child, that sometimes, even into adulthood, we've sort of squashed them down and not really looked at it. So this whole concept of reparenting your inner child, I think is awesome because you in most cases, I know there are some exceptions to the rule. In most cases, people want to nurture children, show them love, um, let them feel empowered in some way. And somewhere along the way, from outside influence, whatever it is, we learn to say to ourselves, are you saying it's like, oh, well, I'm an adult now, so I shouldn't be doing those things. Well, if something brought you joy as a child, why not? Is what I say. So for me, I guess if I walk by a swing and I feel like going on a swing, I should just connect with that because it was such a happy time. It brings back such a positive feeling in my body. Um, just from experiencing that in my mind and just reconnecting with that. There's so much power to that. So I
Mhm.
left
Yeah,
it.
on that theme, like I'm reading a book at the moment, which is coming to mind, like a book by Glenn Thang Katzing called Quest to Rescue Our Future. And he talks about really examining the word development. And development happens within, basically. And what you're mentioning there, and in the conversation so far, but what you just mentioned, Mary Jane, is this idea of our parents like intervene and want to do everything for us. But real development occurs when we experience and make the mistakes ourselves. And, that's where true learning happens. True learning doesn't happen by a parent who's overprotective, for example. And what seems to be the case in many modern families is, and what we perceive as a very dangerous external environment, the whole idea to create a cocoon and protection around, like we're just talking about, we didn't have that, what we experienced and shared earlier in our ability to roam and be free and experience and learn and grow from the environment and from the people who were in that environment with us, other kids, basically, So I think there's an awful lot to be said for allowing our kids to make their own mistakes and but to be there for them as a safety net when as and when those mistakes are made. So you're there to console, to not correct, but to console and support, and then help them on their own development journey. And that where I think true personality and power emerges from, when you find that right balance that honors the kid within ourselves, honors the kid within our kids, and then allows them to make their own mistakes, but not in isolation, not abandoning them to make those mistakes, but being there for them to help them through the lessons that are there to be learned from mistakes and from successes and everything. And I think there's a liberation in that, and a lesson of the power of liberation when we create that space. It's not just the immediate feeling of liberation, but it's the foundation that creates for our kids to explore and know that things aren't always going to be perfect. Mistakes will happen, but that's where the greatest learnings occur. You know what I mean? I think that's a real powerful reminder to me out of today's conversation, is to continue that ourselves from our own child who's not afraid, basic, and fear plays such a big role in all our lives, is to be ready and prepared to be free and to roam in the wilderness of life the same way as we did in the wilderness of our surroundings when we were kids. So I think, yeah, thanks so much for kind of the reminder of the application of today's topic in adult life, I think, really, as well as the, an influence for us to help us with our own parenting.
I mean, I absolutely, am in awe of that, Seamus, because I really think it's so valuable. And could we look at life like that kind of awe-inspiring wilderness? Because the word that comes to mind is, um, from, our conversations and others with those in Simply Live Simply, that idea of creativity and also curiosity is this whole idea of, can we get curious like we were as kids? Kids are really curious. Everything's a question, and you want to know how everything works, not in a kind of like over analytical. It's just kind of like a fun, kind of like wow kind of way. Like, oh my gosh, I wonder how this works. that true idea of wonder. And so I love that idea of, could we look at life like that? I also agree with you about the parenting. I think this idea of not going in and cocooning your kids so much that they never get to experience anything and they don't know how to handle anything. And I was having a conversation with somebody and we were talking about going abroad when we were like, 18. I remember I went abroad, and I remember, we didn't have cell phones. I called my parents like once a week if I was lucky using a phone card. My mother was like, and it was basically for 5 seconds to say, Mom, I'm still alive, like kind of thing. Like, I'm still here, I'm still alive. And then another week would go by. I mean, I've had nephews and nieces and great nephews and nieces who've gone abroad, and every day, at least once a day, they call home. And I'm kind of like, and I'm not saying, it's really nice that my brother and sister-in-law are really that close to them, that they speak to them every day. But there is this kind of idea of like, oh, I can't ask mom and dad. I've got to figure this out on my own. And I've got to like learn. And and if something happens, I guess I can call home and ask, or maybe ask somebody else what to do. But I'm not going to immediately, call anybody. I have to learn how to handle this on my own.
And I think that's the opportunity. And that's life experience, is you're learning what we can manage on our own and knowing when to ask for help as well. And I mean, everyone will have that our own blend. Their own genetics will decide will define that. Their own experiences will define, well, maybe there's something I could not possibly engage with today, that in a year's time, through my own development and experiences, that I will be much better prepared to engage with a year hence. You know what I mean? So it's a moving feast. It's a dynamic environment that we're living in, and developing our full potential only comes through what you've described there, John. I think really around being prepared to be independent, but know when to ask for help when we feel, you know what, I've tried this, it's not working, and I just need some help, and I'll make that phone call, kind of thing. You know what I mean? I think that's as relevant today as it ever has been, is that we create that space for kids to attempt, but never to abandon, and always be there,
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Seamus, for sure. And Jan, when you were speaking about, like about children, I don't know if it's around the age of, what is it, 2 or 3, where they have the gift of language usually, and they're so curious about things, where it's the never-ending question. I don't know, I remember this with my nieces for sure. The never-ending question. You'd answer one question and then it'd be why. And then you'd have to answer that question and it'd be why on a continuous basis. So I just it made me laugh thinking about that. It's like at that age where they're so curious to understand things, and they're absorbing so many things at a time. It's just it's lovely and funny at the same time, because you get to the point where, like, well, just because it's, you run out of answers.
Not, I mean, I love, speaking with kids is so much fun. And then when they do get like, when they are bright, or they get to that kind of logical thing where they don't like understand when you're pretending with them or whatever, or when you're going overboard, and they kind of look at you like, one of my funniest experiences up talking to my niece, and she had like a pretend kitchen. She had like a play kitchen in her bedroom. And I said to her, wow, that's really cool, because if you get hungry in the middle of the night, you can get up and make you can make something for yourself. She looked at me and said to me, Aunt Jan, it's just a pretend kitchen. Like, are you dumb or something? It was so funny. It was like, oh, here I was trying to be like all cute. But, it's those experiences, because they're so funny and they realize they're funny. And I think the other thing, as we talk about like the experiences, those experiences and how it shaped us, is, to remind, I constantly remind myself of this when life gets hard, is like, you've handled this before. You've been doing this a long time. And, this too will work out, or this too is gonna, it'll all be fine. You have, you've done this before kind of attitude. because sometimes it does get overwhelming and, life is life and things happen. And so all of a sudden, you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And how am I going to do this? And then all of a sudden you have to sit back and say, okay, well, I've done this before. I've gone through this before. And there is great, I want to say security and support. And in that, and that even just that one phrase, like your track record's pretty good because you're still here.
I love that. I never really thought about that. Your track record is pretty good because you're still here. Well, yes, I suppose, with a little bit of luck and hopefully know-how.
That's right. That's right. And like Seamus said, knowing when to ask for help and support and friendship and community, because we don't go, we're not in isolation. And we really, I think, we all realize that as this community, continues to evolve, that you need that support and you need that collaboration and friendship and to help you through at times. But that doesn't make it any less for you. Like you're not any less of a person. And as long as you're growing, then it's all good.
Yeah, I think Glenn talks about that in his book as well, about solidarity versus solitude. You know what I mean? And going back to what we talked about Hans yesterday, John, I think as well, about this whole idea of mehel and community support and community relationships and the massive foundation that emerges out of, we're all in this together, that kind of idea of solidarity. And the power of that and the support of that and the safety of that, basically, of that natural supporting, caring environment. And that nurtures, like the child, nurtures the young adults in such an environment. But I think the modern world has got so individualistic and greedy that we've kind of lost that sense of, that natural, caring, safe environment. And then it's like we mentioned before. It's like yeah, it's nice to live there, but you've got to kind of explore outside that safety as well. And I think that's where development happens and occurs. Yes, yeah, you have a beautiful, nurturing environment, but it doesn't mean you have to live there the whole time. But it doesn't mean you have to go to the other extreme as well of a completely individualistic and maybe even narcissistic society. So I think maybe that's again the invitation out of today's conversation is to think about like very intentionally and deliberately about how you shift from the safety and explore beyond that boundary, but not beyond the point of where you abandon what you really care about or where you don't respect the perspective. And that's something else that came up from you recently, like in the last couple of weeks, is the power of honoring our own perspective and the curiosity of honoring another person's perspective. So you can really honor another person in the best possible way, I think, by actually getting curious with their perspective and understand their why. Going back to what you mentioned earlier, MJ, about the why, the why, the why. The why is so inherent in our own development that if you can get curious and understand and listen to another person's perspective, but take that to another level of actually getting curious and really wanting to dig into their perspective, understand it, that's where relationships are truly, truly moved to a different level of really respect and trust and engagement through that active action of wanting to understand another person's perspective, even when that perspective may be at odds with our own. And then you experience, oh, I'm so glad I got curious because now I understand better their perspective and how it fits into my own experiences and whatever. And that's where the magic happens of innovation and creativity and so on and so forth. When these two perspectives collide and conflict and then merge basically into something that's beautiful that would never have happened unless each person got curious with the other, I guess. You know what I mean? And I think that's again another lovely kind of reminder of today's conversation of the innocence of our that childlike curiosity that we can actually implement as adults with great benefits as well if only we allow ourselves to get curious with each other and not be in conflict, I suppose, you know?
Absolutely. If we can get curious, which is a great word. And as you were describing, if we can like, come together to have those conversations or to be open to getting curious about someone else and their perspective and what they think and what their life experiences are is like the collision of two stars, or of two galaxies that create a star. It's upon those collisions, and there's this magnetic force that kind of drives that colliding process together. I mean, it draws, those galaxies together to create a star, but it's, in that kind of almost that explosion that happens in the middle between the two that stars are created. And so that's what on a kind of visual sense, it's kind of nice to think about it that way. Especially when, as opposed to the opposite, where, they're different than me and they have this perspective and I don't get it and whatever, all the labels we can label upon such things, which are not helpful and just create more division.
Exactly.
Um,
Like on conflict and like perspective. This is something Mahiba often talks about. Like both those words, perspective and curiosity. And Mahiba, a lot of people I've met in the last couple of years, like Breda, yourself, Jan, like MJ, Michael, Steve. I shouldn't list names because I'm going to leave someone out. Jeff Davis, Taryn. I mean, there's so many people like Jason. There's so many people who contribute, and then they reinforce the whole idea of, oh God, yeah, these perspectives and the way they blend invite everyone to kind of gain new insights, basically. Like great example, like of the stars colliding, and then of not defending positions, and each remaining in their own little cocoon, but actually you allow those perspectives to be understood, to get curious with them, and out of that comes great power, like great insights, creativity, innovation, like stuff I mentioned before, and new ideas emerge from that space, which would never have emerged. Which is kind of, it's amazing as Brita would often say, to see how simple it is when we take that what the deceptively simple step to get curious, like our child does, with asking the why we can't do that as adults. It's kind of amazing, and it's a great lesson to us of it's so simple, yet we don't do it, and maybe this is an action of today's conversation, is to, ask why to one of your work colleagues when you're at odds with their perspective or where they're coming from, and be open to experiencing. Then, it may lead to maybe no resolution, but it may lead to a great resolution. Who knows? But you'll never know if you don't ask the question.
well, absolutely. Go ahead, Mary Jane.
No, it was just I love that in the perspective, because it's like, it's true, Shiva, as you were talking about roaming in the quarry as a child, and all the things that you experienced, and Jan, with you in the woods, etc. It's just like, we had our little community as it was surrounding us at that time, and we learned and grew together. And sometimes other people had experienced things that we hadn't experienced, but we all learned from their experiences as well. And it's true, as we grow and become adults, we often feel that we have to figure it out all on our own, and we just have to be isolated, when really, it should be the other way around, where the community and hearing the greater perspective of things, really just allows you to connect even deeper with the world, and moving forward. And maybe not all the ideas, just as in childhood, weren't the greatest plans, but we did them anyway. So, and we learned from those and we move forward. But it's just being open to that, I think. And that's the thing with the children, the inner child, is being open, um, to new experiences, because, looking at them with fresh eyes, fresh heart, just willing to, not just listen with the ears, but listen with the heart. And I find children, in a sense, do that very well.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, Mary Jane, because I think that kids do listen they don't, I mean, not only they listen with everything, if you think about it. They listen with their bodies, they listen with all their senses. The idea of touch. I mean, what's explored through taste and touch. I mean, even if what you taste is not great, like putting dirt in your mouth or whatever it is, but, it's a very tactile experience being a child, very sensory. And so the idea of when you meet somebody as a kid, you meet them with all your senses and or whatever, or you experience life through that aspect. And so as adults, we tend to think, so we experience things through our head and then possibly, and then our hearts or whatever. Um, but, there are other aspects which I don't think that we focus on that much, and, as a kid, we use everything when we learn. And that is a part of the learning process, is to experience it all. And per our conversation yesterday, Seamus, with Hans, when we were talking about, facial expressions and body expressions, and learning how to look at someone's face and kind of read what they're going through by just the features and by their expression and the shape of their face, or body position of how they're standing and where their arms are. And and as we mentioned, or I mentioned yesterday, about animals work off of that all the time. I mean, that's how they navigate the world, through all their senses, smell, touch, taste, and definitely body position. I mean, thank you, Al. Um, and so, to take a little bit of that kind of when we go in, and that reminds me of like just being present for someone, because when you're present for someone, you're not only listening, you're looking, you're seeing. I mean, if you're in person, you're looking, you're seeing how they do hold themselves. It's like being very present, especially if you're paying attention um to how they look, what they're wearing, not on the, like I said, features of the face, their facial expression, their eyes, um, their body position. So it's just a very kind of all-encompassing experience versus an isolated experience that's just from the cognitive thinking mind.
You brought in an interesting aspect as you were talking about facial expression, because this was something that we experienced not so many years ago, where we couldn't see very much of our facial expressions because it was covered by face coverings, right? So it was like just remember, it was like I remember for me, I remember thinking I need to make even more expression with my eyes,
Mm-hmm.
so that people could really sense that. I was giving a little emoji with the face mask on. Yes, that is exactly what I'm referring to. But just it was amazing because it was something that a lot of people have forgotten, is actually to look at each other in the eye. And just to see that expression there. And so it was an interesting learning experience, because it's like, oh, it's like, I mean, I tend to look people in the eye, but I know there's some people that don't, and I know some cultures find that rude, but when we were wearing the masks, it's like I made a point of like looking at people even more directly, because it just felt like, sharing the expression and sort of like recognizing. It's like in yoga, like namaste, it's like, I see you, I bow to the divinity in you, I see you. So it was just, you brought that to mind, so thank you for that reminder. It's like, yes, expression.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I mean, I don't know that I always tended to look people in the eye. And some of that is living in a really large city, living in New York for so many years, or the New York area, you kind of don't make eye contact with people. You tend to look down and keep to yourself. It's a protection kind of thing, a safety thing. And some of it is personal, but I worked really hard to cultivate that, to make more of an effort to actually look people in the eye. And it's so you can learn how to do it. So it's not something that's, once you're a specific way, you can't change. You can make an effort to change. But the other thing that happened, I think, that you spoke about, Mary Jane, which was, yes, for face coverings or masks that we wore for those years, but also then we went on Zoom, where we didn't have full body. We weren't able to see everybody in their entirety. It was like we saw everybody from the chest up or whatever, and basically their head. So we have no idea of what someone's doing, or, how they're sitting or what they're sitting on necessarily. And I mean, today we're off screen, and that's if people are on screen. If they're off screen, then you're just hearing a voice. And there was a lot to be said, animation in the voice, intonation, tone, choice of words, things like that. Being a word nerd, Mary Jane and I word nerds, but um, I think there's that aspect too. So there are multiple aspects, but even going online, which has been a gift, don't get me wrong. I've met, obviously all of all of you, and I wouldn't have done that probably prior to COVID. But now all of a sudden we also have a very warped perspective of people and who they are. It's kind of like when you meet a person now afterwards, after being online with them, and you're like, oh my gosh, like people say, oh, I thought you were a lot taller because I'm actually very small, so, so I make up for it in personality. What can I tell you? But it's, um, it's really interesting how we have not like that whole idea of perspective. And you realize one is obviously you don't need to base on what someone looks like necessarily. And it takes that element away in a lot of ways. But in a lot of ways, it is, somewhat of a skewed way of seeing the world.
Yeah, because this idea of perspective, like it's so important, I think, because like looking into it's down as you're saying that, I think it's down to the environment as well. So if you're running around in a very safe environment, you feel very safe, and it seems normal or natural to look another person in the eye, even for a split second. You're playing a game or something, and then you look someone in the eye, and you look back, and you go on about whatever you're doing. And again, in the environment of a big city, it doesn't feel safe, and it doesn't just feel right, I guess. And I think that's another part, a life skill, basic of being human. You just know inherently yourself when you trust your own instincts about when it's right to look at another person in the eye and when it's not, I think. And I think that's another kind of life lesson. We don't have to look at everyone in the eye, but we just know when it is the right thing to do and when it's not the right thing to do, maybe. And I think that's simply part of life experience, and trusting our instincts and trusting how it feels when we look at other person. Just for example, like that's just one small example. When we do feel what it feels like to go ahead and look a person in the eye, and how that literally feels from our inside out, and experience when it doesn't feel right. And these are all kind of things every child develops, from the minute they're born, right up through our adult lives. We're learning and growing and interacting with other people, and instinctively knowing this just feels right or it doesn't. And this is where love comes from, I think. Ultimately, you connect with someone and you don't know the reason why you've connected with them. Maybe it's part of that is due to eye contact, but it's a lot more nuanced and a lot more complex than that. And I think that's just the human experience, I suppose. You know what I mean? Of trusting our instincts and showing up. With I suppose generally more I discussed this briefly with my mum this morning, really, about our intentions. And if we're coming from a place of good intention, only our individual selves will know that what our intentions and motivations are. I think the more people who are coming from a place of not having malintentions, if you want to describe it like that, but know that they're operating from a place that serves them and not wanting to disserve other people, I think that would be such a wonderful world to live in if more people were operating from that space, I suppose,
Well, as you said that, Seamus, it just reminded me of being selfless versus being selfish. And that idea of, when we show up with the attitude of being selfless, like, can I get to know them? It's really, what can I learn from this person? What can I gain? Um, and not with the attitude of what's in it for me. What kind what kind of personal gain can I get from them? And I think we all feel that, and that can be via an email and tone, or whether we are acting from a place of selflessness versus selfishness.
Yeah, 100%, John, I think. And I think it's so true. And we live in such a kind of like, again, I don't want to kind of paint this as being a negative, narcissistic kind of world, but there's a lot of narcissistic type of behaviors where it's the me first type of attitude versus what we talked about with Hans yesterday, where it's more like a supporting, caring environment. And there's somewhere in between, I think, that people, there is that instinct for survival, which we all have within ourselves. We all want to survive, and that's maybe if you want to describe it, the narcissistic side of people. Like we all have that inherent instinct to survive, but not always at the cost of others. And and I think this is the lesson, or maybe the opportunity for us all, is to figure out in those moments like where there is a threat. What is our action going to be like? And it goes back to, I suppose, like the ethics and the morals and like all these thought what are the words? What are the thought experiments of, when we test people's motivations and test people's intentions? There is that sense of, ultimately, at a very base level, there is that instinct for survival and for protection of self, but not at the abandonment of protection for others as well. And I think that's something we all learn maybe through, our honor for ourselves and protection for ourselves, but particularly for parents and their protection for their kids is the immediate example that's coming to mind. Like we'd give our lives basic for our kids, I think, or most people would. And again, that's, I think, the invitation for us all to think about that blend between, the drive for survival versus the drive to care and need, and to be selfless versus self-serving, I suppose,
Absolutely. And as you all know, I always take a lot of sort of examples in my own life, but also in my sort of like cognitively, like when I think about it, from animals, and animals in isolation, don't survive in the wild. They can't survive, is to realize that like they need a pack to be able to survive. Um, because otherwise they're prey. Otherwise they become a meal for somebody. And so they know that element of pure survival is based on being able to work with others and being able to collaborate and share space and with others, and so it's the only way, and I think it's so inherent in who they are. They realize that. And so I think that, we should look at ourselves, like, our communities, our neighborhoods, our friends as our pack, as our, we help them survive, they help us survive.
And it comes back to like this is again reminds me, Jan, of the whole idea of the cells in a body. I think we've talked about this before as well.
Yeah,
The cell just needs to be the cell. The heart cell just needs to be the heart cell. It doesn't need to be a liver cell. And allow ourselves, and ourselves do that automatically and beautifully. But if we're a heart or if we're a liver, we don't want to be an arm or a leg. And I think that goes back to the pack. But the pack, each of the members of the pack has its own strengths, and they show up just like the cells in the body, a heart cell or a liver cell or a lung cell or a bone cell or whatever. They don't try to be anything but carry out the function that they're there to carry out in a very selfless way, because the better they do that, the better they're serving the whole. And I think that ties in exactly what you described about the pack mentality as well, is about each of the pack respects themselves and respects the gifts and the strengths of the other members of the pack, the same as the body does of all its cells.
absolutely. And I love that. I always love that example, because I think it's so true. Because to me, that means that it's inherent, really, it's inherent in who we are. It's part of us, whether we want to or not. Like that's how we function. Um, and also there's no limited communication. There's communication between every part of the body. So you may be different, but the heart cell has to communicate with the nervous system, and the nervous system has to communicate with the digestive system or the intestinal cells. Like there's no limit of saying, okay, I'm not going to talk to so and so because I don't like them and I don't like what they think. So I'm going to be here in isolation and just do my thing. Well, it doesn't work like that in your body.
Yeah, it's the ultimate example, actually, of respecting and getting curious with their perspective, and allowing the others to be the gift that they are, from their own inherent gifts. Like it really reinforces that whole idea of the benefit of getting curious and allowing other people to be exactly who they are, because it benefits the whole. It benefits everyone. It benefits the family. It benefits the community. It benefits the business. And this is something kind of Jason and I have been talking about recently as well, which goes into what, Hans and Param and you and I have been talking about, is about that element of allowing, in the most natural way, is can be the most natural way of having a successful life and a successful community and a successful family and a successful business, like, and environment, you know. So there's no downside to when people allow themselves to show up and be curious with each other and allow each other to be exactly who they are, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're reminding me of, and I just wanted to kind of bring it back to our original conversation where we were talking about being kids, is I think that, as you were describing Mary Jane, and I was describing in Seamus, you, of course, um, was this idea of the opportunity as kids of being able to explore who we were. At that time, we had that opportunity and that freedom to figure out what we liked, what we didn't like, what we loved, what we were passionate about, what we just were allowed that space. And there's another word we talk about a lot, Seamus, is that space to be able to do just that. Life wasn't so scheduled. There was a little bit more freedom. I mean, yes, you had a schedule, but basically it was kind of like you got up, you ate breakfast. When I was a kid, I'm just thinking about it. I mean, we were pretty early risers in my house. Um, and then the rest of the day was like, my mother used to say, we used to say we're bored. She used to say, go outside and play. That was like her big, like, recipe for everything is like, get outside and play. Um, so, but we had that freedom. And if you think about it, we were never bored. Like, I mean, we were bored, but we had such imagination and such curiosity because we weren't, you had to figure out what to do. There wasn't electronics. There were games and stuff like that, depending on the weather, but nature was a game.
Yeah, and I think like we can learn from the past, but we can't live in the past still. So I think we have to respect the younger people's generation as well. That life is different now, and maybe
Right.
it is romantic to look back and say, yeah, we had a wonderful time, and maybe the young kids these days, by our standards, don't have the same liberation or freedom. But I guess we have to respect, I suppose, that this is the way technology, evolution, whatever you want to call it, has created the modern world, and how do we encourage, I suppose, in a world in which we're surrounded by technology and advancements and business and everything else. How is it that we can actually, in this environment, create that level of curiosity, I suppose, that we feel maybe is not as present as it might have been in, let's call it, those more innocent days, when we didn't have the complexity maybe of the connections through technology that are available in the modern world.
Yeah, but I guess the question is, like can you integrate both? Is there an opportunity for both? Could you take a moment and just, get outside, turn off the technology and just experience that and get curious about that and vice versa if that's not who you are. But could there be a little bit more balance so it's not all or one?
It's kind of
So,
bringing me back to what Glenn wrote about in his book, in the kind of the opposite way around. He talked about colonialism, and I kind of get that sense of judgment from my perspective of how the younger people are engaging with the world today. And again, I judge their behavior and on my standards of what worked for me. Kind of reminds me of what the British and the Portuguese and the French and the Dutch did in the colonialism. And this again is coming back to what I discussed with my mum this morning around we imposed our standards
right.
on their life. You know what I mean? And maybe there's an element of that as I think about it in this conversation, that through us imposing our standards and maybe not understanding their perspective, their modern perspective, or being open to get curious with how they are, can encourage them to kind of really examine what freedom means to them or what they enjoy, what brings joy actually to a young person these days. That could be an interesting question to ask, actually, to a community of maybe 7 or 8, 9 year olds or younger or older, whatever. But really, really engage with them and get curious with their life experience, maybe.
I think that's a great question. Mary Jane?
Yeah, it is. It is about. I love this idea about getting curious. That's really what it is about reconnecting with the inner child. It's getting curious about those things that bring you joy. Maybe those things that you've forgotten about. those things before the world or outside voices or whatever it is, those simple things, the things, whatever it is now or in the past when we were children, those simple things that bring us joy and reconnecting with those things. It's really, because it brings us back to that space of feeling joy and the connection. And this is a wonderful conversation about, how we all see the how we see the world. But I love, Seamus, your idea of um asking those now. I love actually to ask questions of my great nieces and nephews to see what's new and exciting in their world, because it gives me perspective too. And I love that. So thank you for the great conversation today.
Absolutely. So we're going to move into our meditation today. So just we invite you to sit back for a moment and take a moment to settle into a comfortable position. Feel free to be sitting or lying down or standing. And if you are in a place where you can gently close your eyes, only if it feels right to you, and simply soften your gaze if it doesn't, and allow your body to relax and settle and your breath to flow naturally. Take a deep breath in through your nose, if possible, feeling your belly rise and your chest expand, and exhale softly through your mouth, letting go of any tension. And with each breath, let yourself arrive fully in this moment. Feel the ground beneath you, solid and steady. And imagine roots growing from your body into the earth, anchoring you and providing support. And remember and imprint that feeling of support within you and feel it in your tissue. Now take your awareness inward to the area around your heart and imagine this space as a warm, safe, and inviting sanctuary. Picture a door here, and as you approach it, you feel a sense of curiosity and love. And when you're ready, open the door and step inside. In this sacred space, you find your inner child, a younger version of yourself. They may look like you did as a child or feel like an essence of yourself when you were younger. Notice how the child appears today. Are they playful, quiet, curious, maybe shy or hesitant? And take a moment to greet them. Offer a smile, a gentle gesture, a loving word, and let them know that they are safe here with you. Ask that child if there's anything they want to share, perhaps a memory, a feeling, a need they want you to know about. If they don't want to speak, that's okay too. Simply let them know you're here to listen and support them whenever they're ready. You might even ask, what do you need from me? What are you trying to tell me? How can I help you? Now imagine wrapping that child in a warm, loving embrace. Could be a hug, could be a metaphorical hug, could be surrounding that child or the two of you with light, a light filled with compassion, safety, unconditional love. And then maybe these words come to your mind. You are safe with me. I see you. I hear you. I love you. You are enough just as you are. If they want to express themselves, give them the space to speak, to laugh, to cry. Let them know they are free to feel whatever arises. Now invite your child to do something joyful with you. It might be something like skipping stones or fishing or on a swing, dancing, lying on the grass, watching the clouds. And let this playful energy fill your heart and body, reminding you of the wonder and creativity and the awe, the curiosity that has always been within you. And as your time together with this child maybe draws to a close, thank them for their insights. And take that energy, that curiosity, that awe into your interactions and communication for this week. Slowly bring your awareness back to your breath. Feel the rise and fall of your chest. Feel free to wiggle fingers and toes. And when you're ready, feel free to open your eyes. Take a moment to notice how you feel and carry this connection with your self, your entire self, from the beginning of time with you into your day. So please connect with Mary Jane and I and everyone else here today. Please join our Facebook and LinkedIn community groups called Spirit-Born Imaginings. It's a heartfelt community where we have discussions like these. We offer workshops and just communication and collaboration for all of us who want to make this world a better place. Our next workshop is All You Need Is Love, which is on Sunday, February 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and registration is now open for that. We still have our packages for our workshops available for 2025. We will be doing 8 workshops in total, and details for all of that will be in the comment section to the event. In addition, we are now placing these recordings on our YouTube channel, which is very exciting. So take a moment maybe to like, subscribe, and if you want to revisit any of the videos there, which are our Friday sessions of the last month or so, and then also our member highlights, which highlight a particular person that is a member of our community and the good work and what they do and their passions. We're wishing you a wonderful week. We look forward to seeing you next Friday back at the same usual time of 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks so much for joining us today. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mary Jane. Thanks, Al.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you,
He killed
Hal.
the cat.
That was cute. Thank
The
you.
wolf, the pack of wolves.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank
There you
you.
go.
Have a good week.
Thank you.
Have a good one,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.